Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm drawing the characters from the amazing digital circus in my own art style. And of course, we're starting with Gangle. Now, when I was thinking about how to draw her, I wanted to go for something cute. Gangle just gives off that vibe to me. Underneath all the emotional damage and constant suffering, which, let's be honest, is basically her entire character, at this point she seems like she'd appreciate something soft and adorable. One thing I knew I wanted to include was her mask. The mask's such an important part of who she is, so leaving them out felt wrong. I decided to have her holding the happy mask specifically because, despite always looking miserable, it kind of feels like that's all she really wants, to be happy. Which is honestly a little depressing when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. I also tried to show a bit of discomfort in the way she's holding it. If you've seen episode 4, you'll probably understand why. I wanted that moment to influence the drawing and add a little more emotion to it. Speaking of emotion, I'm not exactly the queen of facial expressions. So if her face looks a little awkward, that's why. The expression in my head looked great. The expression on the paper? Well, it showed up and did its own thing. The pose was another challenge. I was aiming for something shy and reserved because that's how I see Gangle's personality. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, the pose and I had a disagreement, and this is the result. It doesn't quite scream shy as much as I wanted it to, but we're rolling with it. For her hair, I decided to make it black. From what we've seen, that seems to be the closest thing to canon, so I figured I'd stick with that rather than reinvent the wheel. Overall, I have mixed feelings about this drawing. There are definitely things I like about it, and I don't think it turned out badly. But I do wish I'd managed to capture her shy personality a little better. Sometimes their art has its own plans, and all you can do is sit back and pretend that was your intention the whole time. So for this one, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10, not my best work, but not my worst either. And hey, we've still got more characters to draw, so hopefully things only go up from here. Next up, we have Regatha. And unlike Gangle, where I was kind of figuring things out as I went, I actually knew exactly what I wanted to do for Regatha before I even started drawing. I already had a pretty clear image in my head of how I wanted her to look, and honestly, I think she turned out really well. Regatha is one of the sweetest characters in the amazing digital circus, so I wanted her pose to reflect that. I chose a gentle, welcoming posture because that's the kind of energy she gives off throughout the show, at least when she's not being emotionally tortured by the digital nightmare she lives in. Even though I knew what I wanted, drawing it was a completely different story. Her hair was probably the biggest challenge. I had to restart it multiple times because it just wasn't working. The shapes looked weird, everything fell off, and during the sketch phase, it honestly looked terrible. You know, when you reach that stage of a drawing where you're convinced you've forgotten how to draw. Yeah, that was me. Since Regatha is basically a rag doll, I really wanted her hair to have that wool-like texture. Easier said than done. I tried my best, but wow. That was a lot harder than I expected. Thankfully, once I started coloring everything, it began to come together and look much better. Her dress was another struggle. In her actual design, it's soft and flowy, but when I look at my version, it feels a little stiff. Fabric is one of those things I'm still trying to improve at drawing. It always looks simple until you actually have to draw it yourself. Then suddenly cloth becomes the most complicated object known to humanity. One thing I am really happy with, though, is her expression. I wanted her to look kind, gentle, and approachable, and I think I managed to pull that off. Compared to some of the other characters I've drawn, this is definitely one of my stronger expressions. Overall, I'm really happy with how Regatha turned out. It's honestly one of my favorite drawings from this entire challenge so far. Sure, there are things I'd still like to improve, but I think the final result captures her personality really well. For that reason, I'm giving Regatha an 8 out of 10, definitely one of the stronger pieces in the lineup. Now we have Zubul. Before we get into the drawing itself, I just want to address something quickly. I searched on Google and it says that Zubul uses any pronouns. So before anyone starts typing an essay in the comments, I'm using she, her for this video. We can all put the pitchforks down now. Anyway, moving on to the actual drawing. For Zubul, I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do when I started. Unlike Regatha, where I had a clear vision, this one was basically me staring at a blank page and hoping. inspiration would magically appear. Spoiler alert, it didn't. So I did what any artist does when they're completely out of ideas. I went to Pinterest. I looked through a bunch of different interpretations of Zubul to see what other artists had come up with. There were some really cool designs, but none of them felt quite right for what I wanted to do. Eventually, I decided to stop searching and just wing it. The first thing I settled on was giving her short hair. I don't know why, but in my style, it just felt right. Zubul has always given me that kind of energy, and I think the shorter hairstyle fits the punk-inspired look I was aiming for. Speaking of that, I really wanted this drawing to have a punk aura. Zubul always seems like the kind of character who's tired of everyone's nonsense and isn't afraid to let them know about it. So I thought piercings would be a perfect addition. I added quite a few of them, but I had to be careful not to go overboard. There's a fine line between punk aesthetic and accidentally turning your character into a walking jewelry store. Now, when it came to all of Zubul's weird shapes and parts, that's where things got a little complicated. Some of them were easy enough to adapt, but others had me completely stumped. The wing piece was probably the biggest challenge. I didn't want to give her full-sized wings because I felt like it would look a little strange with the design I was going for. Instead, I incorporated the wings into her choker, which I think worked a lot better. As for the crab claw, I turned that into a pattern on her jeans. It felt like a fun way to reference the original design without making it look weird. And of course, I had to include the classic middle finger with the sensor bar. That just feels like such a Zubul thing to do. Honestly, if I didn't include at least a little attitude, it wouldn't have felt like Zubul at all. Now, before anyone points it out, yes, I know one of the shoulders is ridiculously long. Please believe me when I say I didn't notice it until the entire drawing was finished and colored. At that point, I had already spent way too much time on it, so I decided to embrace the mistake and move on. Sometimes art teaches you valuable lessons. Other times it teaches you that your character apparently has giraffe anatomy. Overall, though, I really like how this drawing turned out. It's definitely one of my favorites from the whole lineup. I think the punk vibe came through pretty well, and despite a few questionable anatomy decisions, I'm really happy with the final result. So for Zubul, I'm giving this one a solid 7 out of 10. Next up, we have Jocks. Now Jocks is actually a bit different from the rest of these drawings because I drew him about a month before I drew the girls. At the time, I was still trying to figure out this art style and work out exactly what I wanted it to look like. And honestly, if you've spent any amount of time on my channel, you'll probably notice something pretty quickly. It's mostly girls. There's a reason for that. I struggle with drawing guys. I never really know what to do with them. Female characters come naturally to me, but when it comes to male characters, my brain suddenly forgets everything it knows about. Or it's like the information just leaves the room. So Jax was kind of my first real attempt at drawing a guy in this style. Well, technically after the K-pop Demon Hunters guys, but those were done in a completely different style, so I'm not counting them. For Jax, I decided to give him slightly longer hair because I thought it suited his personality. I also wanted him to have that playful, smug expression, the kind of grin that instantly tells you he's about to make somebody's day. Significantly worse. Basically, a very Jax expression. I also decided to keep the shirtless look. I considered giving him a shirt because I've seen some really cool fan designs that do that, but in the end, I decided against it. His original design is shirtless, so I figured I'd stick with that. Then there's the little Playboy bunny tattoo. Honestly, I just thought it would be a funny detail to add because he's a bunny. Wait, he's actually a bunny, right? You know what? It doesn't matter. The tattoo is there now, and we're all just going to accept it. What I'm happiest about with this drawing is that it was my first attempt at drawing a male character in this art style, and I think it turned out surprisingly well. There are definitely things I could improve, but compared to where I started, I'm really proud of it. I think the expression came out great. The overall design feels like Jax, and for once I wasn't staring at the drawing wondering why men are apparently the hardest thing I've ever tried to draw. Overall, this is easily one of my favorite pieces in the lineup. So for Jocks, I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. And finally, we have Pomni. Out of all the girls, Pomni was actually the first one I drew. Unlike some of the other characters, where I spent way too much time staring at a blank canvas, wondering what to do. I already had a pretty clear idea in mind for her from the beginning. Kind of like Regatha, everything just seemed to click. Once I started sketching, the drawing flowed surprisingly smoothly, which, as any artist knows, is both a blessing and slightly suspicious. Usually when things go too well, it means a disaster is waiting for you somewhere later in the process. Thankfully, that didn't really happen this time. The biggest things I struggled with were her hat and all the puffy parts of her outfit. They look simple when you're looking at the character design, but actually drawing them is a different story. Getting those shapes to look right took a lot more effort than I expected. For her pose, I wanted something a little awkward because that's exactly the vibe Pomni gives me. She's constantly confused, stressed, uncomfortable, and questioning every life decision that led her to the digital circus. So naturally, I thought an awkward posture would fit her perfectly. And honestly, I love how it turned out. The expression came out exactly how I wanted it to. The pose feels very Pomni. And overall, I think everything works together really well. It's one of those drawings where I look at it afterward and think, yeah, that's pretty much what I had in my head. Of course, no drawing is perfect. The one thing that bothers me is her arm. Looking back at it now, it kind of resembles a very long, very thin stick. Somehow, I didn't notice that until the entire drawing was finished, which seems to be a recurring theme in this video. Apparently, my ability to spot anatomy issues only activates after I've already colored everything and emotionally committed to the piece. But honestly, it doesn't bother me enough to ruin the drawing. It is what it is. Overall, this is my favorite drawing out of the entire collection. I think I captured Pomni's personality the best, and it's probably the piece I'm most proud of. Everything from the expression to the pose just came together in a way that I'm really happy with. So for Pomni, I'm giving this one a 9.5 out of 10. Definitely my favorite of the bunch. And for a fun little twist at the end, I thought, why not draw my own OC in the amazing digital circus art style and see what happens? Now, when I first started planning this character, I had a completely different idea in mind. Originally, she was supposed to be some kind of TV robot. The concept was that she'd be able to switch between different channels programmed into herself, and each channel would completely change her personality. For example, the comedy channel would make her hilarious, chaotic, and completely unpredictable. The action channel would turn her into an over-the-top action hero who somehow thinks every situation can be solved with a dramatic pose and an explosion. The horror channel would make everything around her creepy and unsettling. You know, the kind of character who walks into a room and suddenly the lighting budget triples. Then there was the documentary channel, where she'd narrate everyone's actions like a nature documentary. Here we see the Pomni in her natural habitat, experiencing yet another emotional breakdown. And finally, there was the emergency broadcast mode, a rare mode triggered during extreme danger. The idea was that before arriving in the circus, she heard millions of voices. TV hosts, news anchors, actors, commercials, children. But after arriving, she could no longer remember which voice was originally hers. Honestly, I still think that's a really cool concept. Unfortunately, there was one small problem. The sketch looked less like a mysterious TV robot and more like a microwave that had gained sentience. No matter what I did, I couldn't unsee it. So after staring at the drawing for a while and realizing I wasn't happy with it, I scrapped the idea completely. Well, mostly. I do plan on revisiting that concept someday because I still really like it. It just wasn't working for this video. So for my backup plan, I decided to create a character that borrowed little elements from all the characters I had already drawn. I gave her Jox's smile, one of Pomni's eyes in her hat, one of Regatta's eyes, Zubal's wing, and Gangle's ribbon-like strips. At least I think that's what they're called. If they're not, please don't roast me in the comments. Originally, I wanted her to be some kind of creepy horror teddy bear. Then that idea didn't work. So I tried making her more of a horror clown. That also didn't work. And somewhere along the way, I somehow ended up creating what feels like Pomni's long-lost cousin from a low-budget spin-off series. The whole design just gives me discount Pomni vibes, and if I'm being honest, I'm not very happy with how it turned out. But by this point, the deadline I had set for this video was approaching rapidly, and sometimes as an artist, you have to accept that not every drawing is going to be your masterpiece. Sometimes you just have to look at it and say, yep, that's definitely a drawing. So for this one, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Let me know in the comments which drawing was your favorite and what score you would give each one out of 10. Also, if there's another show, game, or series you'd like to see me draw in my art style next, feel free to leave your suggestions below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!